Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Craig, you also brought up something, the NCAA with some proposed rule changes. At least they are discussing it.
Yeah, I mean, they're discussing a lot of different rules changes the offseason, and so there were some proposals that were sent out, and various outlets have reported on them. Just kind of try to round it up a little bit, but they have been meeting since, I guess it was Wednesday when these meetings started, and they are, just taking a look at how college football can be better and what rules would be great. And, we kind of talked about it with Jamie Chadwell and, like, the running clock and all that, but one of the ones that I've seen most talked about is the targeting penalties, also the fake injuries, guys going down. We saw it quite a few times this year, especially, who was it that was, like, notorious for doing it? I know Arkansas, I seem to do it quite a bit. Maybe that's who I'm thinking of. Or I don't know. There's some team that I just seem to recall doing it quite often throughout the season. But the proposed rules changes, getting into that, would allow conferences, this is from ESPN's piece on this, allow conferences to appeal targeting fouls that were called in the second half of games in order to avoid the carryover penalty of sitting out the first half of the next game. So that's a proposed rules change according to the Rules Committee. So what do you think? You could appeal a targeting foul in the second half to try and avoid the carryover of being suspended for the first half the following week.
Or how about just change the way you review targeting?
But they're not going to. They're not changing targeting, though. I mean, it doesn't appear that.
How about this? How about if you have a targeting call against you, whether there's 2 minutes into a game or 2 minutes left in the game, you get ejected, and you don't have to have a carryover.
So
just because of the timing of it, it makes a difference. You get ejected, you get ejected.
If a team believes a targeting call was erroneous, its conference will be allowed to submit a request to the National Coordinator for Officials. They'll review it, and if it's obvious it was incorrect, the call will be overturned, and they can be cleared for the first half of the next game. So that has no in-game bearing whatsoever.
No.
You get ejected in the second half, you get ejected in the second half. So it doesn't change really anything as far as the grand landscape of college football. It'll be something you'd notice on a very, small level in terms of your team happens to have a guy targeted that week. You might pay attention to it. Outside of that, I don't think most people are probably paying attention to that one if that's a change.
I bet the percentage of changes will be like 10%.
Committee also proposed reporting an investigation into addressing teams that are awarded injury time or that are awarded an injury timeout when a player fakes an injury. If that's passed, like if any of these rules that I'm talking about are passed, it's got to be passed by or will occur at their April 20th meeting. So we're still 5 weeks or so away from that. And if they are passed, then they will go into effect for next season. But yeah, the fake injuries and the trying to penalize teams for doing that. How do you prove it? How do you?
I don't know. That's
there are some very you'd almost have to do it retroactively because there are clearly there's YouTube footage of guys who are just like they're down, their knees hurt, all of a sudden the play's over, and it's like they just jump up and skip over to the sideline. It's like nothing, they're just trying to slow down the game. It's very clear that's what they're doing, but then again, how do you prove that on a singular level?
You know what I would do instead of trying to prove that they're faking an injury? Because look, I can make a reasonable case that something happens to me in a football game that hurts more. And Smokey, you played in high school. There's sometimes that you get hit and you feel like you're about to die, and then a minute and a half later, you're like, okay, I'm a little better now. I'm not.
I think that wind knocked out of you.
Yeah, exactly. So, if that happens, instead of saying you have to be out for one play, you have to be out for 3 plays or 4 plays. That would maybe make it to where better pick who's going to fake the injury because – let's just say that especially because it happens on defense. That's when it happens.
Yeah.
So say your best pass rusher is the guy who has to fake the injury. If it was Baylor a couple years ago, you tell James Lynch to fake an injury.
Yeah, you don't want
you're going to have 4 plays where they're throwing a ball all 4 times, and your best pass rusher is going to be out.
But it is ridiculous to watch a game and they go back to the replay and there's Auburn defensive lineman, and he's totally fine. All of a sudden, he looks over the sideline, and then boom, he goes down immediately. And it's like, come on, dude, that is such.
They did it against Oregon. That Oregon game was the one where they were essentially standing in the huddle, and I guess it was no huddle, but hey, Oregon's about to run this down our throats. Hey, I think it was Nick Fairley, right? It's like, hey, Nick, fall down.
Tons of examples, yeah.
Nick, just fall down.
Yeah, it happens quite a bit, and I would like to see them address that somehow. I don't know how they do that, though, but that is something that's being talked about is how to handle the fake injury situation. And also, there was one more, also a rule that would allow only blocking below the waist by linemen and stationary backs inside the tackle box which they're calling a great change for player safety based on their injury data. When they've made changes and limited blocking below the waist, they've reduced the injuries. So that is another rule that they're potentially looking at. And I don't know what the odds are of them actually passing many of these because there's kind of gray areas, with targeting or especially with the players faking injuries. But those are some of the issues that they're looking at. But it seems the players feigning injuries is the big one. That's the one that everybody's really like trying to figure out a way to correct.
I just don't know if you could ever try to prove that they're faking. So the only way, I guess, is, okay.
Well, to do it in-game will be hard.
You do need to then sit out more than just that play.
I think if there's video footage of you and you just clearly falling down because of a direction from the sideline, there's got to be some sort of a penalty that you could put on post-game because it's obvious when they show it on occasion. And there's other times where it's maybe not so obvious, but that also then gets into, okay, how do you prove it? But there are some definitely obvious ones that we've seen over the years.
Yeah, and then of course you could like have somebody who just faints or whatever, and he's being like legitimate, and you get a lawsuit because, oh Lord, I just wish you could just hope that somebody.
Well, maybe the coaches shouldn't have players faking injuries. That would be the way to prevent it. But clearly, there's guys that are going to take advantage of everything they can. Like probably everybody's been guilty of it at some point or another. So I don't know that anybody could really point fingers.
I think they should go back to having two tailbacks or the wing tee, and then you can't go fast. That would end it, right? No more spread. No more no huddle. All right, Craig, is that it? All right.
Yeah, that's pretty much
Very
it.
good.
I mean, but it's interesting to see what kind of tweaks they are attempting to make. I mean, we do cover college football on a pretty consistent basis, so it's of note, and we'll see if they end up going forward with any of these changes. April 20th, again, is the date where they'll be meeting again, and we'll see what goes into effect for 2022.
Brad Strickland, who is an official, high school and college football official, just put up on the chat room, targeting should be handled like basketball flagrant 1 and 2.
That'd be a good idea.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love that. Yeah.
Stephen Snook mentioned, he's our listener and viewer in Ohio, who's the coach that came up with the 40-yard dash? Paul, you mentioned Woody Hayes. He said close, and the next thing I thought was was Paul Brown.
I thought Bo Schembechler. He said in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, it was Bo. It was Paul Brown, which doesn't surprise me. He was always ahead of the curve, and then Landry among some others as well. From Eric, flops are obvious at some point. It's hard to enforce, but sometimes so clear. A signal from the coach and a player falls down. Just because it isn't and never will be perfect doesn't mean we shouldn't try to be better. Eric, I agree with you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, there's a lot of people that just, whatever the issue may be, sports or otherwise, it's like, well, we can't change it. It'll be too hard. It'll take too long. Let's just not even try. Like, no, not that. Like, not trying is not the answer to anything in life. So, yeah, I'm glad they're at least trying to address it as best they can. I do like the idea of like a flagrant 1, flagrant 2, something along those lines to maybe provide some clarity and some more direction. But and you're right, the players, we're on the same page. There's very obvious situations, and I can think of easily seeing situations last year where it's like the guy's totally acting. But again, how do you prove that? It would have to be, I don't know, determined after the game somehow, and then what would your penalty be if you're proven to be faking injuries?
The problem with that is if you can't prove it during the game, if it's not like a fight or something like that where you go to the tape, who's punching, who's coming off the bench, whatever, you got to figure out how to just do it in the 60 minutes of game time. And now you have more meetings and more committees and more whatever. All right, when we come back, our